How are babies made? The dreaded question that nearly every parent fears to answer. I remember it like it was yesterday. I walked in on my parents laying in bed, freshly showered, getting ready for their evening routine, and most importantly, blissfully unaware of the loaded question I was about to ask them. Mommy, how are babies made? I asked. My mom looked at me in horror while my dad erupted in laughter. Once my mother regained her composure, she mustered up the courage to say, well, you know how mommy's thing looks different than daddy's thing? I nodded my head in obvious hesitation, while my mother took one long, deep breath and tried to avoid eye contact with me. And she said, well, to make a baby, Daddy has to put his thing inside of mommy's thing. Ew! I exclaimed. That sounded like some kind of medieval torture. Who the hell would want someone's pee stick inside of them? Gross! Well, of course the years passed by, tons of hormones were released, and suddenly that medieval torture made sense now. But what still didn't make sense to me were all the different words that were used to describe what happened after that medieval torture occurred. What was this embryo, fetus, blastocyst, zygote, morula? What on earth are all these words talking about? Why didn't everyone just use the word baby? Welcome to the Decanta channel, where we discuss all things educational and we never duck away from the difficult topics. Subscribe to support free, quality education and to stay in the know. Do your part by watching one full episode and express your like or dislike in the comments below. So now back to all these words. In science, we use a lot of different terms to describe the same organism in order to explain what stage it's in. So let's go over the very first stage with a word called zygote. After your partner's sperm swam through the acidic environment of your vaginal canal and made it to your fallopian tube and battled all of the other sperm to be the one successful winner to penetrate your egg, he then wriggled his way into the center of your egg's main control center. We call this the nucleus. That's where your egg's DNA is stored. Once all of those things have occurred, we now have a mated pair between your sperm nucleus and your egg nucleus, combining those half sets of DNA, and that is called a zygote. So the word zygote is literally used to describe the very first stage of a developing human being. In the first 30 hours of this process, the zygote will be dividing like crazy, going from 2 cells to 4 and 4 to 8 and so on and so forth. The next phase of your developing human is called the morula, and this occurs roughly 72 hours of this continuous dividing, up until the point where you reach about 16 to 32 cells. That's when we refer to your developing human as a morula. And for now, your morula is just hanging out in your fallopian tubes. It's important to note that at this point, those cells that make up the morula don't have any specific roles yet. Their main role is to divide and conquer and keep growing and growing. However, this morula phase doesn't last very long because by day 4, we're going to call your developing human a blastocyst. Now, the human blastocyst is really special because it contains stem cells. Those stem cells are also referred to as the inner cell mass, and those are the cells that literally develop into the human being. Think of the blastocyst as a ball of cells or a balloon with a hollow middle. Those stem cells are just hanging out in there, kind of like glitter that you would put in the middle of a birthday balloon. So basically, between 72 hours of dividing and day 4, those cells that had no individual roles yet differentiated, meaning they were given roles, to become a hollow balloon with a lump of stem cells inside that literally becomes the human being. Now, because those stem cells can literally become the entire human being, at this point, they can create any part of the human body. And that's why they are so valuable to the science field in terms of research. We can use those to create human body parts. However, in just a few short days, those stem cells will also be receiving their own individual roles. In a successful pregnancy, between days 6 and 10, the blastocyst, that balloon of cells filled with the stem cell glitter in the middle, is going to hatch from a zona pellicula around it in order to implant into your uterus wall. Think of it like planting a seed into rich watered soil so it can grow. At this point, the HCG hormone, the hormone that's used to measure whether you're pregnant or not in a pregnancy test, starts getting released into your body. So hypothetically, at this point, you should be able to see a very, very faint pink line on a pregnancy test. This is also the point in development where many people may refer to your developing human as an embryo. Remember how I said those stem cells wouldn't be stem cells forever? Well, by week 2 or around day 14, those stem cells are already busy assigning themselves new roles. So now they essentially lose that superpower to become anything because now they have a specific role. They define the top of your developing human and the bottom of your developing human. They'll even define the head portion and the butt portion very soon. And these changes indicate the next stage of development called gastrulation, or becoming a gastrula. Between days 14 and 21, your blastocyst balloon is going to go through some elaborate steps to fold into a gastrula. To visualize what's happening at this stage, in order to become a gastrula, we need to go inside our blastocyst balloon and we need to look at what those stem cells, the inner cell mass, is doing now. During the process of gastrulation, that inner cell mass becomes a flat plane somewhere in the blastocyst balloon. That flat plane of cells is going to define the top, the bottom, the head, and the butt of your developing human. The cells are going to continue multiplying and dividing and growing until what we end up with is inside our balloon. We have a region that's kind of like an extra air sac that becomes the amniotic cavity, and another sac below that middle layer of cells that's going to become the yolk sac of your developing human. Now that middle portion that's sandwiched between the amniotic cavity and the yolk sac, that is literally your developing human. As a side note here, that yolk sac is providing the initial nutrients to your developing human to divide and grow. However, later on in development, the outer layer of your blastocyst balloon, those cells are the ones that will become the placenta, and the placenta will be providing the nourishment through the rest of the pregnancy. But for now, the yolk sac is dominating that function. Now let's just focus on your developing human sandwiched between the amniotic cavity and the yolk sac. Notice that there are 3 distinct layers of your developing human. The top layer, which I've indicated with a royal blue color, is going to be a layer called the ectoderm. The bottom layer, which I've indicated with a green color, is going to be a layer called the endoderm. The ectoderm, literally meaning outside skin, and rightly named so because it's the outermost layer, the top royal blue layer of cells, is going to become the brain, spinal cord, and neural tube very shortly thereafter through a separate process called neurulation. But that's not all it will become. It will also become skin, hair, nails, the lens of the eye, and the innermost part of the ear. The endoderm, literally meaning inside skin, and again rightly named because it's the innermost layer of cells, indicated in green, is going to become the thyroid, liver, lungs, pancreas, and intestines, which are all pretty important features to develop from a single layer of cells, don't you think? Now, as this gastrulation process continues, there will be other cells that migrate in between the ectoderm and the endoderm. I've indicated those with a teal blue. Those are what we call the mesoderm, which literally translates to middle skin. Again, rightly so. The mesoderm will become the musculoskeletal system, including connective tissue, the circulatory system, the kidneys, and the internal sex organs. Think a female's vagina, uterus, fallopian tubes, and so on. As a fun side note here, the default setting for initial sex organ development happens to be female, even if you are a male now. So that means up until about the 6th week, when the Y chromosome of a male is activated, technically we all just look like females. And that's also why men have useless nipples, by the way. So after we have this 3-layer ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm, gastrula, your developing human embryo will begin forming organs like the heart and a brain. But what does this word embryo mean anyways? The term embryo can be used for all of the stages we just talked about up until about week 8 of pregnancy, or 2 months pregnant. So embryo is kind of like the blanket term that you use to describe all of the initial steps of human development. It is not, however, a term used to describe a potential human being, but rather a human in a certain stage of life, the embryonic stage, just like you as an adult now in the adult stage used to be in the adolescent stage, who used to be in the childhood stage, who used to be in the infant stage, who used to be in the embryonic stage. Still the same person, you. Now those first 2 weeks of being an embryo, that zygote, morula, and blastocyst stage, looked a lot like a ball of cells, but everything hereafter, far from it. From the gastrula stage to week 8, there are some unique defining features that form, including your blueberry-sized human's neural tube, the spinal cord, central nervous system, and brain in general, between weeks 4 and 7 of development, a tiny little heart tube beating at 65 times per minute by the end of the 4th week, with that beating being detectable around the 6th week of pregnancy using a vaginal ultrasound, tiny little arm and leg buds sticking out of a rather elongated body with an enormous head comparatively to the rest of your embryo's body, and little eye holes where the eyes will also eventually develop. After week 8 and onwards to the rest of your pregnancy, we call your developing human a fetus rather than an embryo. By week 10, your little fetus has translucent skin with arms and legs that can bend. Since all of the major structures are in place now, the fine details can begin developing, such as the nails. Even the fingerprints start forming by week 13. By week 20, your fetus makes intentional movements like sucking their thumb, opening and closing their hands, swallowing, and moving away from a light source if you happen to shine one strong enough on your belly. Your fetus's sense of touch, taste, smell, and hearing are also coming into play at this point. So if you like to sing in the shower, make sure you sing extra loud for your fetus to be able to hear you. By the way, if you're having a girl, she'll have all of her little tiny ovaries filled with all the eggs she'll have for the rest of her life. So congrats! That means not only are you pregnant with your daughter, but also your future unfertilized grandchildren. Between weeks 21 and 24, it's also possible for your fetus to survive outside the womb with medical intervention. By week 30, your fetus looks and acts an awful lot like a newborn baby, complete with hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, lips, even a constant wake and sleeping cycle. Your fetus has lungs that are expanding and practicing with amniotic fluid instead of air at this point, and they have squirmy little muscles that they're practicing by punching you with from the inside out. From week 30 to 40, the biggest things that are occurring are all in preparation for living life on the outside world, including putting on a bunch of fat underneath the skin so that they can regulate their own body temperature, and further development of the liver and kidneys, along with continuing brain development, of course. By week 37, you are considered early term, whereas you're full term by week 39. So if you haven't given birth yet, it could be any day now. Although science would still say that your developing human is referred to as a fetus, I think it's pretty safe to say that you're happy and excited, maybe even a little nervous, to meet your baby now. And I'm sure you're extra excited to be able to move normally again. I would love to hear your pregnancy story. Tell me all the ups and downs of your zygote developing all the way into a fetus, and maybe even what it was like having your fetus go to a full-fledged baby in your arms. Let me know in the comments below. These videos take quite a bit of time for me and my team to make. However, it'll only cost you a second to either like or dislike this video. To join me next week on the super simplified science of pregnancy, a 40-week series, all you have to do is subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.